Every prison ever built was designed by someone who believed it couldn't be escaped from. They studied the failures of every prison before it. They added walls, guards, cameras, fences, water, and distance. They ran the numbers and signed off on a building they were certain was permanent. And then someone proved them wrong. Today you're going to find out how some of the most audacious escapes in history actually happened, what the prisoners used, how long they planned, and in some cases whether they were ever found. These are the craziest prison escapes ever explained. Let's get into it. Alcatraz, nicknamed the Rock, is an island sitting in the middle of San Francisco Bay, surrounded by water so cold and currents so strong that the warden didn't need to sell the inmates on the impossibility of escape. The bay did that for him. For 29 years, the federal penitentiary on that island held some of the most dangerous criminals in America, and not one of them made it out alive and confirmed free. Then, in June of 1962, 3 men weren't in their cells when the morning count came around. What the guards found instead were heads. Dummy heads propped on pillows made from soap, toilet paper, and real human hair collected over months from the prison barbershop. The faces were painted to match skin tone. In the dark of an early morning cell check, they had fooled the guards completely. Behind the ventilation grills at the back of each cell, the concrete had been hollowed out. The 3 men had spent months scraping through the wall with spoons sharpened against the floor, working only at night and hiding the progress behind cardboard painted to match the wall. Behind the cells ran an unmonitored utility corridor that the prison's designers had never considered a security risk. The 3 men had been using it as a workshop. They'd built a raft. More than 50 stolen raincoats, stitched together by hand, inflated with a concertina modified into a makeshift bellows. They built life preservers from the same material. They constructed paddles. Everything was assembled in that corridor while the rest of the prison slept. On the night of June 11th, they climbed to the roof through a ventilation shaft, descended the outer wall, and slipped into the bay. They were never found. The FBI searched for years. The official conclusion was that they drowned in the crossing. The currents in that part of the bay run hard and cold, and the odds of 3 men on a homemade raincoat raft surviving a night crossing are not good. The case was closed in 2012 after nearly 50 years. But in 2013, a letter arrived, purportedly written by one of the 3 men, claiming they had made it. The handwriting was analyzed. The claim was never confirmed or definitively disproven. Alcatraz kept its official record. No confirmed escape. But 3 men walked out of the most famous prison in America using spoons, raincoats, and dummy heads made of hair, and nobody has been able to say with certainty what happened to them after that. The next man walked out of his prison with nothing but a bar of soap and complete confidence that nobody would stop him. John Dillinger. The Lake County Jail in Crown Point, Indiana, had been publicly declared escape-proof. The sheriff told every newspaper that would listen there would be absolutely no trouble with their newest prisoner. She was so confident she posed for photographs with him, smiling, arm in arm. The prosecutor did the same. They looked like they were at a party. Dillinger, according to people who were there, jokingly told them he would escape. Everyone laughed. On the morning of March 3, 1934, a jail turnkey walked into the exercise area, carrying soap for the bathrooms. Routine morning, nothing unusual. Dillinger pressed something against the man's ribs and told him not to move. What he was holding was, depending on who you believe, a gun he had carved from a piece of wooden shelving with a razor blade. He had used a safety razor handle as a barrel. He had used nails as sights. He had colored the whole thing with shoe polish. The deputy on overnight watch had slept through the entire preparation. He didn't wake up until 10 minutes after Dillinger was gone. Whether the gun was actually wood has been argued ever since. Some historians believe a real weapon was smuggled in, and the wooden gun story was invented afterward. The wooden object exists in a museum. Nobody has ever fully settled it. What nobody disputes is what Dillinger did next. He walked that carved wooden gun through the jail and bluffed every single guard he encountered. Not one of them checked whether it was real. He locked 24 prison staff in their own cells. He found 2 actual machine guns inside the jail and took them. He walked out through every door, carefully locking each one behind him so nobody could follow. Then he walked into the prison garage, found the sheriff's personal car, and drove to Chicago. There were no two-way radios, no way to call ahead. The jail that had been photographed and celebrated in the press as Indiana's finest contribution to criminal containment sat there, fully locked, staffed entirely by people who were now inside the cells, while the most wanted man in the country drove away in the sheriff's Ford. The sheriff told reporters afterward that she felt she was getting blamed just because she was a woman. The prosecutor's career never recovered from the photograph of him with his arm around Dillinger. The deputy who slept through it was arrested. Dillinger was killed outside a Chicago theater 4 months later. The wooden gun, or whatever it actually was, outlived everyone involved and is now in a museum. He walked out of a nationally famous escape-proof jail with a piece of furniture and the reasonable assumption that nobody would look too closely. He was right. The next escape didn't rely on bluffing anyone. It relied on a tunnel, months of digging, and over 200 men moving through the dark at the same time. The Great Escape. Stalag Luft III was a German prisoner of war camp built specifically to hold Allied airmen who had already escaped from other camps. The Germans had thought this through. The huts were raised off the ground so nobody could dig underneath without being seen. The entire camp sat on bright yellow sand that was nearly impossible to hide if you moved it. Seismic microphones were buried along the perimeter to detect tunneling activity. The Germans were proud of this place. They called it escape-proof. A captured RAF officer arrived and immediately started planning the largest mass escape in the history of the war. His plan was not subtle. 3 tunnels simultaneously, codenamed Tom, Dick, and Harry, running more than 300 feet from inside the prisoner huts to the forest beyond the fence. 200 men through them in a single night. Over 600 prisoners were needed just to support the operation. Digging, disposing of soil, forging documents, sewing civilian clothes out of blankets, building an underground ventilation system, and keeping the whole thing secret from guards watching every hour of every day. The soil problem alone was extraordinary. Every handful of bright yellow sand had to disappear. Prisoners sewed hidden bags inside their trousers that could hold sand against their legs. They walked casually around the exercise yard, releasing it through holes in the pockets, scattering it into the surface soil with their feet. They moved roughly 100 tons of sand this way without the Germans noticing. Tom was discovered before completion. Dick was converted into storage. Everything went into Harry. By the time Harry was finished, it was 30 feet deep, over 300 feet long, lined with 4,000 bedboards taken from prisoners' bunks, electrically lit using wire stolen from the camp, and equipped with an underground rope trolley system to pull men along its length. The Germans had buried seismic microphones along the perimeter. The prisoners had dug past them. On the moonless night of March 24, 1944, 76 men crawled through the tunnel and out into the frozen forest. The 77th was spotted by a guard and the alarm was raised. Of the 76 who made it out, 73 were recaptured. Only 3 reached safety. Furious at the embarrassment, orders came down that all recaptured escapees were to be executed. 50 were shot. It was later ruled a war crime. 18 of those responsible were convicted after the war. 13 were executed. 600 men spent the better part of a year building something extraordinary. 76 made it out. 3 survived. The man who planned the whole thing was among the 50 who were shot. He had already escaped twice before. He knew the risks. He planned it anyway. The Great Escape was built on months of patience and hundreds of hands working in secret. The next escape needed none of that. It needed one man, one night, and a hole in the floor that nobody had noticed yet. El Chapo's Altiplano prison escape. Mexico's Altiplano federal prison was considered the most secure facility in the country. It held the most dangerous criminals in the nation. Surveillance cameras covered every inch of the building. Guards monitored the most high-profile inmates around the clock. One particular prisoner was watched so closely that officials were confident he would never leave. On the evening of July 11, 2015, a prison guard delivered the prisoner his nightly medication. Cameras recorded him walking toward the shower area in his cell. The shower was the one blind spot where the cameras couldn't see. He stepped behind the dividing wall. He never came back out. When guards checked the cell, they found a hole in the shower floor. It was roughly 2 feet wide. Below it was a ladder. Below the ladder was a tunnel. The tunnel was nearly a mile long. It ran 33 feet underground, deep enough to avoid detection. It was tall enough to walk through upright. It was lit with electric lighting. It had ventilation. Somewhere inside it, investigators later found a motorcycle mounted on rails, used to carry construction equipment during the build. At the far end, the tunnel emerged through a hole in the floor of a half-built house in a nearby neighborhood, a construction site that had been active for months without raising any suspicion. Someone had spent months building an entire underground railway to a specific shower drain in a maximum security prison, and nobody had noticed. This was not the first time. In 2001, El Chapo had walked out of a different maximum security prison, hidden inside a laundry cart, reportedly with the help of bribed guards. He had spent the following 13 years on the run before being recaptured in 2014. He was back inside for less than 18 months before the tunnel was finished. He was recaptured 6 months later and eventually extradited and convicted in a United States court. He is currently serving a life sentence in a maximum security facility in Colorado with no shower blind spots. But for 6 months in 2015, the most wanted man in the world was out because his associates had quietly built a mile-long lit and ventilated tunnel directly to the one spot in his cell where the cameras couldn't see, and the entire prison had been sitting on top of it without knowing. The next escape didn't go underground, it went straight up. The helicopter escape. A helicopter appeared over a prison yard in southern France in 2001 and landed long enough for one man to climb aboard and disappear. His name was Pascal Payet. He was serving 30 years. He had decided not to. Most people who escape never look back. Payet looked back. 2 years later, still a fugitive, he arranged a second helicopter escape from the outside, this time for 3 former cellmates still locked inside the same prison in Louis. A helicopter landed in the yard. The 3 men climbed aboard, and the helicopter lifted off. He had flown back to the prison he had already escaped from to break other people out. All 4 were recaptured 3 weeks later. Back inside, French authorities decided they had learned their lesson. He was classified as a prisoner under especially high surveillance. He was moved between prisons so frequently that he was never kept at the same facility for more than 6 months. He was placed in solitary confinement. He was one of the most closely watched inmates in the entire country. On July 14, 2007, 4 masked men hijacked a helicopter at an airport in Cannes. It was Bastille Day, the French national holiday commemorating the storming of a prison. The timing was either a coincidence or the best-planned joke in the history of French criminal justice. The helicopter flew north for 20 minutes and landed on the roof of a prison. The 4 men entered the building, navigated to the solitary confinement cell of the most surveilled prisoner in France, and walked him out. The entire operation took less than 10 minutes. No shots were fired. The pilot was released unharmed. The helicopter landed nearby. The men scattered. French authorities issued a European arrest warrant within 2 days. He was recaptured in Spain 3 months later. By that point, he had escaped from maximum security custody 3 times, organized a 4th escape for someone else, and done it all using the one method French prisons had specifically been trying to guard against since the first time he did it. After the 3rd escape, he was imprisoned in a location the French government refused to disclose publicly for security reasons. Whether or not there was a helipad nearby has not been reported. 3 helicopter escapes, the same method every time, and the prison system never found a way to stop it before he used it again. The last escape on this list may or may not have happened exactly the way it was told. That uncertainty is part of what makes it the most famous prison escape story ever written. Papillon. Off the coast of French Guiana, a small cluster of islands sits in the Atlantic, surrounded by shark-infested water and currents strong enough to sweep a swimmer out to sea in minutes. The French penal colony there was built on a simple premise. The ocean was the prison. No walls needed, no elaborate security systems, just water in every direction and the understanding that nobody was swimming home. A prisoner arrived in the early 1930s, sentenced to life for a murder he claimed he didn't commit. His nickname was Papillon, the French word for butterfly, taken from a tattoo on his chest. Over the following years, he attempted escape after escape. He was caught, punished, sent to solitary confinement on the most isolated of the islands, and kept there in near total silence for 2 years. He came out still planning. The final escape came after years of studying the water around the island from his cell. He had noticed that every 7th wave in a particular cove hit the rocks with enough force to create a surge that could carry something out past the reef and into open current. He collected coconuts. He bound them together into a makeshift float. He waited for the 7th wave. He jumped off a cliff into the ocean holding a bag of coconuts, rode the surge out past the rocks, and let the current carry him away from the island. He washed ashore on the mainland, made his way through jungle and across borders, and eventually reached Venezuela where he lived out the rest of his life as a free man. He wrote the story down decades later. It sold 5 million copies and became one of the most famous books of the 20th century. A film followed. The escape became legend. Then researchers began checking the records. French penal colony documents suggested that several details in the account didn't match. Some historians believe portions of the story were borrowed from other prisoners or embellished beyond recognition. The French government released records indicating he may never have been held on Devil's Island at all. Whether every detail is true, partially true, or the assembled memories of many men compressed into one story, the core of it stands. A man was sent to an island designed to be inescapable. He left on a bag of coconuts, and the story was compelling enough that 5 million people read it and believed every word. That's either the greatest prison escape ever told or the greatest story ever built around one. Either way, nobody forgot it. Every prison on this list was declared escape-proof by the people who built it. Every single one. They studied what came before. They added more walls, more water, more guards, more distance. They ran the numbers and signed off. And then someone with enough patience, creativity, or stubbornness proved them wrong. The buildings are still standing. Most of the people are long gone. And the stories are still being told, because there is something about a locked door and a person determined to open it that nobody ever gets tired of hearing. If you enjoyed the video, YouTube thinks you'll really like this one next.